He was a ghost who stalked California for over a decade, an intruder who slipped into homes, tied up his victims, and vanished into the night. Entire neighborhoods lived in fear, not knowing when or where he would strike next. For more than 40 years, police searched for him, but he always seemed one step ahead, until science uncovered the truth. This is the story of the Golden State Killer, the predator who hid in plain sight. It started as whispers in the dark, an intruder who moved silently through California's suburbs in the 1970s. No one knew his face. No one even knew his name. But his presence left a trail of fear so deep that for decades, entire neighborhoods slept with their lights on, windows locked, and nerves on edge. He was first known as the East Area Predator, then the original Night Stalker. Decades later, the world would know him by a single chilling title, the Golden State Killer. This man was not just a criminal, he was a phantom, a shadow, and for more than 40 years, one of the most elusive predators in American history. His crimes spanned the state of California, from Sacramento to Santa Barbara, leaving behind broken lives, broken families, and a haunting legacy of unanswered questions. For a long time, it seemed like he would never be caught. But science had other plans. The story begins in the mid-1970s, in the quiet suburbs around Sacramento. At first, the attacks seemed random. An unknown man breaking into homes late at night, armed, masked, and merciless. He would stalk neighborhoods for days, studying his victims, learning their routines, sometimes even making phone calls to terrorize them beforehand. The victims reported a man who tied them up, whispered terrifying threats, and seemed to take pleasure in their fear. He left houses in shambles, neighbors horrified, and police without a single solid lead. In those early years, he was called the East Area Predator, and he was relentless. Dozens of households were targeted. Families were left traumatized. Couples who thought they were safe in their own homes discovered that their walls and locked doors couldn't protect them from the shadow lurking outside. Then, the crimes escalated. By the late 1970s and into the 1980s, the attacks grew more violent. Entire communities felt under siege. Detectives worked around the clock, setting up stakeouts, following thousands of tips, but the predator was always one step ahead. He slipped through neighborhoods like smoke, vanishing before police could respond. As his reign of terror spread south through California, his identity shifted too. Investigators began connecting him to a series of murders. He wasn't just breaking into homes anymore. He was taking lives. And so he became known as the original Night Stalker, a title that captured the pure dread he inspired. For decades, the case dragged on without resolution. The crimes were horrifying, but the trail was cold. In total, he was eventually linked to at least 50 home invasions and assaults, and 13 murders. He was meticulous. He left little to no evidence. And worst of all, he disappeared just as suddenly as he had appeared. By the mid-1980s, the attacks seemed to stop. Had he died? Had he been imprisoned for something else? Or was he simply living among everyone else, hiding in plain sight? The mystery grew larger with time. Books were written. Entire online communities devoted themselves to finding him. Retired detectives refused to give up. Victims and their families waited decades, desperate for closure. But the years passed, and the case seemed destined to remain unsolved. Then, everything changed in 2018. And it happened in a way that nobody could have predicted back in the 1970s. The breakthrough didn't come from fingerprints, or witnesses, or even a confession. It came from something brand new: genetic genealogy. Here's how it worked. Investigators took DNA evidence left at several crime scenes, samples preserved for decades, and uploaded the genetic profile to a public genealogy website. These sites were originally designed for people who wanted to trace their family trees. But instead of finding long-lost cousins, detectives found something else: a distant relative of the Golden State Killer. From there, it was like building a family tree in reverse. Investigators mapped out relatives, narrowed down possibilities, and eventually focused on one man: Joseph James DeAngelo. A name that, at the time, meant nothing to the public. But when police looked closer, the pieces fit. DeAngelo had once been a police officer in California during the 1970s, at the exact time the attacks began. He knew law enforcement tactics. He knew how police thought and how to avoid them. After leaving the force, he lived an ordinary suburban life. Married, with children, working as a mechanic. To his neighbors, he seemed like any other aging man. No one suspected he was the phantom who had haunted California for decades. But when police looked closer, the pieces fit. DeAngelo had once been a police officer in California during the 1970s, at the exact time the attacks began. He knew law enforcement tactics. He knew how police thought and how to avoid them. After leaving the force, he lived an ordinary suburban life, married, with children, working as a mechanic. To his neighbors, he seemed like any other aging man. No one suspected he was the phantom who had haunted California for decades. Investigators tailed him, waiting for their chance. They collected DNA from something as simple as a discarded tissue, and when the test results came back, the match was undeniable. After more than 40 years, the Golden State Killer had finally been unmasked. The arrest shocked the nation. DeAngelo was 72 years old when police dragged him out of his home in April 2018. He looked frail, almost harmless. Certainly not like the monster who had once struck fear into entire communities. But the evidence was overwhelming. His double life had finally collapsed. In court, DeAngelo faced dozens of charges. The trial itself was unusual. Because so many years had passed, the legal system had to work around expired statutes of limitations for some of his earlier crimes. In the end, he avoided the death penalty by agreeing to a plea deal. In 2020, in a crowded courtroom filled with survivors and family members of victims, Joseph James DeAngelo pleaded guilty to 13 murders and multiple kidnappings. During those hearings, the world saw a man who once terrorized California reduced to a shadow of his former self. He sat in a wheelchair, wearing an orange prison jumpsuit, barely speaking above a whisper. Survivors confronted him face to face, recounting their nightmares, their stolen peace, the lives he had shattered. Many of them had waited more than 40 years to look him in the eye. Their voices were strong. His was nearly silent. The sentence was life in prison without the possibility of parole. DeAngelo will spend the rest of his days behind bars until death finally closes the book on him. But for the families and survivors, the case will never truly end. The scars are permanent, the memories live on, and the chilling thought remains. For decades, the Golden State Killer lived undetected, hidden in plain sight, raising children, shopping at the grocery store, chatting with neighbors, while carrying the darkest of secrets. The capture of Joseph James DeAngelo marked not only the end of a nightmare, but also a turning point in criminal investigations. The use of genetic genealogy opened a new door for solving cold cases, and since then, countless other decades-old mysteries have been unraveled using the same method. In many ways, D'Angelo's downfall signaled a new era, where science, patience, and the persistence of investigators finally overcame even the most careful predator. Today, when people remember the Golden State Killer, they don't just think about the crimes. They think about the fear that gripped communities, the decades of uncertainty, and the extraordinary way justice was finally served. His story reminds us of the darkness one man can hide, but also the light that comes when truth, no matter how long it takes, finally breaks through. And so the Phantom of California is no longer a mystery. He has a face, a name, and a prison cell. But the legend of the Golden State Killer lives on, a chilling reminder that evil can hide in the most ordinary of places. And sometimes, the neighbor next door is not who they seem to be.